All right.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here. I'm Elliot Began, joined by the venerable Bob Burke, who I said in my introduction on the written form of this that he's also known as the industry's Yoda. So
And may I say, may I stop you for a moment and say, I was going to say, happy I am, except that would imply that I actually believe that, and
yes,
I didn't want to go there. So
yes, and I also want to
thank you
clarify
for
it has
and
nothing to do with
venerable just
looks.
is equals old.
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, we both qualify for that. So we're just going to talk about all things that we're seeing in the industry. I have questions for you, but I also want to make sure that we do what we normally do on these, which is invite the folks attending to put their questions in the Q&A, which is down at the very bottom of your screen. So fire away as you have questions. We'll do our best to answer all of them. And we just want to talk to you all about what we're seeing in the industry, what's going on, what we see as seed changes that are going to stick, what we see that is transitory, and just have fun and talk a little bit. So I won't take any more time. I'm going to let Bob, for those of you who don't know Bob, which is shocking, I don't know that anyone possibly doesn't know Bob Burke, but Bob, why don't you give everybody a little bit of overview of you, your background, and what you do.
Happy to. Thanks, Elliot, and really appreciate being here. And before I start, I believe they're still taking registrations for the Hirschberg Entrepreneurship Institute, which starts tomorrow and runs through Friday. So anyone who's listening into this who hasn't registered, it's extremely affordable and of high value in terms of both lessons, inspiration, great storytelling, as well as all the interaction with the with the investors and the people who are pitching. So I think that's a great thing for anyone who's part of your community here. So on me, briefly, I've been consulting now for about 23 years, mostly around bringing natural, organic, and specialty products to market across all classes of trade, all channels, work with companies across many sizes and categories. Also, along the way, have done a how-to guide reference book called the Natural Products Field Manual, soon to be in its 9th edition. Also put on seminars a few times a year. I've been doing this for a long time. So we typically do a 2-day sales seminar, both in December in Boston, and then alternating San Francisco and Chicago in the spring, which went by the wayside this year. And it's also joined by a seminar on raising capital. And for both of these, we have a terrific slate of speakers, experts, cover a lot of ground. We've been evolving these as the industry's evolved. And, part of the value, which seems like a foreign concept today, is the interpersonal networking that goes on and all the sort of magic that happens by getting a bunch of interesting people together in one place. I also am privileged to serve on a number of boards and advisory boards. And so for me, that's a source of constant lifelong learning and stretching myself into new areas and having the great good fortune to be associated with some terrific companies. So
Like
that's
I
a little
said,
bit of my background.
Yoda.
Yeah, you're nodding off asleep there, Elliot.
Yeah, well, that happens at my age. Bob has
My
nothing to do with
soporific delivery here.
nothing to do with nothing to do with the messenger, just the receiver. Okay, so again, anyone who wants to pose questions, that's really what we're here for. It's not to hear each other speak. We get to do that often, and we do.
Yes.
And Bob and I like to spend quite a bit of time. But I'll start it off with just a question for Bob and I to discuss. But what are you seeing right now that has been a surprising outcome of the strange period that we're in?
Boy, that's such a good question that I wish you asked me yesterday, so I could give it some thought.
No way. I'm putting you on the spot, dude.
Yeah. So I guess some of the surprises are just the overall speed at which our world is changing around us. And, I think there's a prevailing sentiment out there that a lot of things that were sort of in motion anyway have been dramatically accelerated as we've gone through this new way of living. So for many of us, whether it's, we're living in an area of the country that's sort of under lockdown, whether it's people stepping up and doing far more eComm, home delivery, going into a supermarket with some trepidation and, being clothed in masks and gloves and keeping our distance and all that, but just the speed at which things have upended our lives. And so that's something that's still hard to digest. The things that we saw unfold from that, so some amount of panic buying and pantry loading, some amount of getting used to homeschooling for people with young kids, activities like baking and cooking and mixology going to whole new levels. I mentioned, and some of you know, I'm on the board of King Arthur Flour. They're having a period of time like you never would have believed, where literally baking has replaced baseball as America's pastime. And so as far as surprises, I'm really struggling to come up with something that was, absolutely unforeseen. What I'm gratified by is the outpouring of support I've seen in the industry. So I can't say that was a shocker, because I think this was a very special industry, and I'm referring broadly to natural specialty, smaller companies, the community of entrepreneurs and advisors, investors, and others that I think have really come together, such as a lot of the work you've done in terms of hosting events like this and the articles and blogs you've put out, where, sort of coalescing a lot of the thinking of how do we navigate through this, how do we think about one eye on the here and now and one eye on where we are when we come out of this. I think that's been one of the really heartwarming things that I've been able to, witness and see firsthand. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't feel like there's anything that has shocked me in this. I feel like we had been looking through kind of a veil, a sheer veil, and not seeing things as clearly. And this industry has shown itself for what it is, which is innovative, unified, willing to rally around its founders, its entrepreneurs, and it's been, I think, very affirmational that we stumbled into the right business, that we are here where we are, and not that it's easy. I mean, you and I both talk to people every day who are struggling or who are dealing with a lot of anxiety and worries about their business today or their business tomorrow. But there are lots of people willing to listen and to help, and I think that's all you can ask for. We can't take away the uncertainty, but what we can do is try to be there in support of that and sit through it with them. Okay, so that was our nice little, kind of altruistic message. Now let's get to some tough shit. What you and I both have the rare opportunity of looking under the hood of a lot of businesses, right? And we see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right now, if you were to advise any of the folks listening here about things that they should be doing right this minute, really looking at their business and asking themselves hard questions, what would you have them focused on?
Well, perhaps in no particular order. This is reminding me of, I think it was Samuel Johnson who said, for the man who's about to be hanged the next morning, it concentrates the mind tremendously. And I think right now there are a lot of things that are happening around us where, we're all busy, consumed with our daily lives. Just getting through emails and calls and meetings and activities and things like this, and we're at a point, or so many companies are at a point where there's absolutely no room and no tolerance for, say, dithering or for, putting off things that might have been good things to do, but now are a matter of urgency. So, this might start with the reality of cash management. So, an intense focus on, knowing where you stand, and then doing every possible thing you can do to, stretch out your cash depending on what your resources are at the time. And there's been a lot written about it. There's been a lot. I know you've put out some really good information on that, on just, shortening that cash conversion cycle, getting whatever line of credit, if you had one, download it as quickly as possible, seeking out whatever's available in the way of debt financing, stretching suppliers, cutting out fixed costs. So there's the whole topic of cash management, which is absolutely important and a reality, no matter where the business is at. The second is, sort of streamlining. And one obvious place to start is, being a little bit harsh and cold-blooded and unsentimental about cutting underperforming items and SKUs in your line, thinking in terms of 80-20, both in terms of what you're producing and shipping, but, things that might have been just kind of there and coming along, you got to take a sort of a scalpel to. And really not to be, I'm not going from being harsh and cold-blooded to being sociopathic. That might apply to some people too, And so we all want to be there for our teams. We want to provide good leadership, empathy, understanding, et cetera. But, a lot of companies will have people that, might have been underperforming. And again, it wasn't urgent, but now it is. And so if push comes to shove and your back is against the wall, and it's a question of whether you're going to make it or not, that's when everybody's forced to make some hard choices. And that might mean, trimming the staff, especially, again, the ones that are easier decisions. So those are some of the, big ones, money, people, product, would be key things. And then, you might have had, a little bit of myopia in terms of being focused on, getting into bricks and mortar. Anyone who can be doing eComm must be doing eComm. Anyone who's thinking about direct to consumer, understand what you might be getting yourself into. A lot of people underestimate the investments around driving people to your site. So digital marketing, fulfillment, et cetera. So understand the full pro forma P&L before you go fully into it. But almost everyone should be on Amazon and Thrive, and depending on your category, there's plenty of special websites out there. And so when you think ahead to what's likely to stick around post, COVID, whether you think that's 3 months, 6 months, a year, or longer out, it's certainly going to be elevated e-commerce, direct to consumer, curbside pickup, home delivery, things like that are, definitely going to be, moved up in a step fashion from where they are prior to this.
I want to come back to that in a second. And I mean, and one thing, by the way, I put in the chat box for everybody the link to the Hirschberg Entrepreneurship Institute. If you haven't registered, do it, because to Bob's point, one of the keys, he and I I think we've stood on this soapbox together for a long time, and that is the importance of cash, your cash flow, and cash management. If nothing else, the first hour where Andy and Gary go through their whole talk and outline about how to do just that is worth the price tenfold of being there. So I would highly recommend it.
Their patented, fabled cash is king, of which you've joined in.
I was going to say their cash shtick, but I was going to give them a break. I just want to add two things to what you said, and they're two kind of mantras that I would encourage people to use right now. One is to really spend the time discerning what the difference between what is interesting and what is important. So I had an entrepreneur tell me, he was one of the early inventors of the video conferencing, and they were presenting their concept. It was a codex machine, and they were presenting it in VC on Sand Hill Road, and this was years and years and years ago. And it was a big, huge thing that put out a lot of BTUs. And one of the associates with the fund said, "Hey, we should cover this. It looks ugly. Let's cover the base of it with a tablecloth." So his partner's in Boston, he's in Palo Alto, and they do this video conference, and it works, but BTUs heat the tablecloth, and the tablecloth catches on fire and puts a big burn mark in the rug. And he's devastated about it and so forth. And his partner kept saying, "I can't believe we almost burned the office down." And his partner kept saying, "Yeah, but we did the first ever, coast to coast video conferencing." And that's the difference between what's interesting and what's important. The fire was interesting.
Can I, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
can I just add on before you go on?
Yep.
I would invite all of the people on this to look up the Eisenhower method. And that is what's urgent and what's important.
Yep.
And it's a simple 2x2 way of making decisions and setting priorities. And it's just an extension of what you've been saying.
I couldn't agree more. And then the other really quick one is the difference between being kind and being nice. And this comes back to your SKUs and your people. So there is a discernible difference between what is kind and what is nice.
That's great.
Okay, so we got some questions. This one from Mark. Hello, Mark. Good to see you here. Biggest success story that you've been involved with, and the 3 reasons why that company was successful, Mr. Burke.
Well, I think without thinking about it too long or too hard, because at this point I have been involved in many, many, many hundreds, if not more, companies in some level or another. And the one I was involved with, I would say one of the longest periods besides Stonyfield. So very briefly, one thing I left out of my background is prior to being unemployed all these years, I ran marketing and sales at Stonyfield, and left on happy, friendly, gracious terms. Still do a lot with Gary Hirschberg, including this week. Came back 10 years later, was on the board for 5 years. And Stonyfield's been a tremendous success. But let me set that aside for a moment. And one of them is Orgain. And Orgain, for those of you who aren't familiar, was founded by Dr. Andrew Abraham, just a remarkable human being who was both an MD and a cancer survivor, who as a young man, a teenager, was going through his treatment, was appalled at what the sort of medical industry was giving people who were sick, things like Boost and Sure, things it might have been filled with corn syrup and corn oil, and a bunch of, it was basically calories with a bunch of synthetic vitamins. And he came up with an amazing product. I had the good fortune of working with him pre-revenue, wrote his plan, worked with him through startup and launch, helped connect him to some brokers and contract sales and other resources, stayed friends, and then 8 or 9 years ago joined his board and was on his board until the end of last year. We had an exit of sorts, but he had just built this amazing company. And for one of the things he did, I know, Elliot, one of your mantras, because I hang on every word you say, is capital efficiency is the new velocity, TM. And Andrew was able to build a significant cash flow positive business by being extraordinarily lean. And part of it is just super smart guy, very focused, driven, yet a wonderful family man. So it wasn't like, he's living in a cave somewhere. And he was, had an amazing work ethic. So he was able to build meaningful revenue, cash positive, with him and an assistant, and then him, an assistant, and a sales guy, and just slowly built out the team. Very deliberate about where he spent money, not being penny wise and not being short-sighted, but just being, again, very laser focused. And so, that was a key part of his success early on. Also, a remarkable product. So he looked at what was out there, and he had a set of key principles and guiding guardrails around. This was going to be organic, first and foremost, and it was going to be the absolute best product out there in terms of quality of protein, X amount of servings of fruits and vegetables. Every ingredient went in there was of the highest integrity, so they really delivered on their brand promise to the consumer. Third thing was, opportunistic in the sense of a very quick innovation cycle. And so Andrew and his team were really tuned in to where the market was going. They could respond very quickly, and it was the, innovate quickly, fail fast if necessary. I'm doing my best to avoid using the word pivot, but they were able to pivot very effectively into new areas and capitalize and capitalize on trends. So, they started out as a ready-to-drink protein shake company. We're able to quickly move into sort of powders. As plant-based became a thing, they were able to move into plant-based while keeping their dairy-based products, their whey-based protein, which appealed to a certain segment of consumers. And then, built out a really solid team, knowing that, when you're a one-man operator or a founder with a very small team, you're going to have limitations. And if you can build a solid team around you, you're going to go much further, much more effectively. And that's what he did. And so they've just been a tremendous success story.
Sorry, Bob. I think first of all, Andrew's just one of the nicest guys, period. But I think that is really, if anyone wants a case study for what to do right, and I think it also really starts with just a good, decent human being who's doing something that they're passionate about doing.
Yes.
And just to distill it, I mean, it's really about, I think it's about being nimble, and so you're always looking for the white space or the problem, and being nimble in the way you construct your organization, the way you innovate, all of those things. It's about being capital efficient, and it's about being resilient, right? So you have to be able to withstand things. And I also feel like, and Bob doesn't give himself enough credit, but it's also, if you're a founder, it's surrounding yourself with good people who think differently than you do. And finding that balance between being strong-willed and malleable, and it is a balance between both. You need to find where that sweet spot is. We've got a couple of questions.
I just want to add one thing for everyone who's on the on this session. Do yourself a favor, go to the Orgain website or on YouTube. And there's a very short, maybe 5-minute video on Andrew's story. And I've seen it a number of times, never fails to inspire me, and would strongly recommend everybody checking that out.
I would agree. Okay, a couple questions for you. So Jenny, just following right up on Orgain, her question was around plant-based. Do you think brands need to be fully plant-based if that's one of their call-outs, or can they have, can they put their toe in both pools?
Well, I mean, Orgain is sort of living proof, right? They, a significant part of their sales are still dairy-based, meaning whey protein, and a very significant part of their business is plant-based as well. So they have both offerings out on the market. Stonyfield is still obviously mostly a dairy company, organic dairy company, and yet also offer some plant-based because of where that market is moving. So I don't think it's about purity tests, and one of the things that we've seen, just because we've been at this for a while, is vegan and plant-based might be used interchangeably by some people, but vegan is a little more politically charged, right? Because it really embodies a lot about ethical treatment of animals and cruelty and things like that. Whereas plant-based tends to be a little more imbued with health, whole foods, a little bit of sustainability. So in terms of some of the semantics and some of the nuances of what it means, it shifts a little bit that way. But I think you can offer plant-based products and, you know, either dairy or animal-based products as well, and not have to choose one over the other.
Yeah, it just depends on what you put your stake in there. I mean, I
Yeah,
look at, you know, the difference between plant-based and vegan. You know, plant-based is a lifestyle and vegan is a self-identity. And that doesn't mean one's right or wrong. It just is a different perspective. And
sure.
if your stake in the ground is that you're a vegan company, then you need to stay completely plant-based. If you're a company that says we create products that meet different lifestyles, you know, one may be plant-based, one may be keto, one may be paleo, whatever we're going to call it next week, that's fine too. um a couple questions coming in. Just a reminder, if you can, for those, if you could just put your questions in the Q&A and out in the chat, just makes it a little bit easier, the back and forth. But this one is for companies that are perishable and now looking at D2C as a needed distribution channel, where pre-COVID they may have been retail first. What advice do you have on starting D2C programs that are losing money out of the gate? And I'll stop there because it's a longer question, but we'll just stop there.
Yeah. So we're not saying do DTC so that you can go up the learning curve, right? After, in the same breath of saying you really have to be mindful about conserving cash and stretching out your runway, et cetera. I guess I would do the all-purpose, do your homework first, right? So know what you're getting yourself into, fully understand the economics, understand, you know, what are the fulfillment costs likely to be? What's that minimum order size where it makes sense? Does it make sense for people to order in those quantities, et cetera? And, you know, can you sort of connect all the dots? Now, there are people out there who do perishable fulfillment. So one is called Go Perishable that I've come across, and there's likely others. When we had Katie Paul from KeHE on the Hirschberg Institute call a week ago, she mentioned how KeHE's doing a lot of direct-to-consumer, as is Thrive. So they're doing fulfillment for companies as well as direct-to-retail that way. So, you know, I guess I would really say understand what you're getting yourself into and make sure it works. And
Yeah.
so, you know, one of the people doing it, notably, granted it's a gift business, is Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream. So they're shipping super premium or whatever comes after super premium and after artisanal, like Fabergé eggs. They're shipping that with dry ice in coolers to people's homes, you know, at a price that enough people are buying where it's a good part of their business. And they figured out that whatever the retailer was making, maybe 40%, whatever a distributor was making, 15 to 25 or 30%, they were putting that into fulfillment, and they could make that work for consumers.
Yeah.
Likewise, Hint Water is a significant business, and that's shipping water, right? Which is, in the grand scheme of things, lower value, very expensive, heavy, cumbersome to ship, but their economics work, but not without doing a lot of homework and really understanding it without plunging in. You may find that DTC doesn't work right now for what we have. Maybe people don't want to buy $100 or whatever that minimum purchase has to be for that particular category. And so we're going to try to, you know, see what we can do on Thrive and Amazon Fresh and you know, Fresh Direct as alternative ways of reaching the consumers without shipping direct to their homes ourselves.
Yeah, and I'll just to add to that a couple of things. One is that know your waterfall. So this goes for everything. We talked about cash flows, but to me the other important one is waterfalls. And so take that price and make sure you take that retail price you intend to sell to the consumer and back out all of the costs that go in. The other thing around D2C, especially around perishable, is that it's all about network design. It's all about how you design your fulfillment. And if you're going to tackle it nationally, you're going to need multiple 3PL locations that can get to, 90, 95% of the population within 2 days ground. And the other thing that I would say is that I would not look at it transactionally, transaction by transaction. I would really look at the lifetime value of what you expect a customer to be. And if you don't have a clear path to profitability over that lifetime value, then you don't have a proposition that's going to work. It's okay to invest in that first order, the acquisition. It's okay to be upside down. But if you're not certain that if you do that with your consumer, that over their lifetime of purchasing from you online, that it's going to result in a profitable relationship, then there's no reason to do that. And then one last thing, and that is, the higher that threshold of cost that works, don't freak out about that, but just know that you're going to have to think of other ways to drive discovery. Because if trial, is dependent on spending $60, $70, that's hard to get people to make their first purchase of something like that. So, using other types of outlets and locations and giveaways and collaborations are good. But I'm a big believer that D2C, both ambient and perishable, can work and can work profitably. I'm also a big believer that you should never get into any aspect of your business without it's okay to invest in portions, but without a clear path to profitability. It just doesn't make sense. And I'll come back to that in a second. So let's go to the Q&A here. Let's see. Hi, Bob. Hi, Elliot. All my compassion and empathy for our brothers and sisters that are challenged, and not to be insensitive, harsh, and cold-blooded. Did you write this, Bob? But for those companies having exponential growth, how to manage that success and leverage that forward?
Well, I mean, sometimes exponential and unexpected growth brings the same problems as the opposite, right? So it's, really having some control or as much understanding and control over your supply chain as possible. So you're not, it's not turning on and off a faucet. It's ramping it up and ramping it down as needed. It's thinking about, if you do have this unexpected surge in demand, how might you capitalize on it? Because you're getting a lot of trial, whether you're a well-established brand or an early stage brand. And so how do you help make that stick? Can you turn on your digital marketing, social media, storytelling, et cetera, to sort of embellish and share what your brand stands for and what it's all about, your values, what passions brought these products to market, and get that out there so some of this sticks afterwards. I mentioned I've been involved as a board member with King Arthur Flour. Hard to imagine a more mature category that is just growing at a crazy 60, 70% growth rates. Joshua and I both have some familiarity with the canned seafood business. Needless to say, that's going through the roof as well. And so I'd say most of the companies I'm involved with as a board member or advisor are really dealing far more with growth than the opposite. And so they're all thinking about, how to sort of make hay while the sun shines and try to get a bigger base of consumers to build their franchise, so that after this subsides, which hopefully it does sooner than later, they have a much bigger business.
Yeah, and I would say also it's about being appreciative for what it is and communicating that appreciation, but also being wary of what it could mean. I mean, and make sure you understand the potential unintended consequences of this upside, which, a lot of people are saying there's going to be a downside. I don't see that happening personally. I mean, I think there's going to be a leveling off and a slowing down. But I think for quite some time, in-home consumption is going to tip the scale more so than out of home, and that bodes well. A question I wanted to ask us both, so I'm going to ask you and us both a question. So I need someone, I'll fake a voice. No,
Good.
you and I have the unique opportunity of working with quite a few brands that are foreign to the U.S., that are coming into the U.S. And I, of course, have the cheat of thinking about this question and its answer before I asked it. So I got a step ahead of you. But what are you seeing that how their view differs from that of an entrepreneur that is, a domestic entrepreneur here?
Well, that's a good question. To put it in context, you and I are both advisors to New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and I've been working with them for quite a long time. I've also been working 10 or 11 years with Board BIA, the Irish Food Board, a number of Canadian agencies like the Quebec delegation and Agri-Foods Canada in various consulates. And then I've worked with a number of larger companies coming into the US from Finland, Ireland, and Vietnam, and other countries. And I would start off by saying one of the things is sort of like with domestic producers is a little bit of moderating expectations. The streets of New York are not paved with gold. And even though this is a massive, massive market, it's really hundreds of mini markets, not just the 50 states, but, Southern California, Northern California, LA is different than Orange County, which is different than San Diego, and so on. So it's really helping them understand these sort of micro markets. The other big thing that is a expectation that you have to sort of disabuse many of the companies of is in most other countries, they find a partner who is their exclusive partner for entering and scaling the business here. So it could be their importer of record. It could be someone who's buying that container of product, warehousing it, has a sales team, works with other distributors, sells to retail, and it's kind of their one-stop shop, which really isn't how it is here. And then, on the positive side, with almost all of them, like with domestic companies, I'll encourage them to start online, especially if they're an ambient product. And I also will almost always advise them to pilot in a region so that they can validate all the assumptions they had coming in about having the right product mix, configuration, price point, category management story through the trade and to the consumer, and things like that before they grow. But it's really, I would say, to summarize, getting them to sort of narrow their focus, moderate their expectations, be very thoughtful about narrow and deep, and having a success in a region or a channel before they start expanding too fast, which is pretty much the exact advice I give to domestic companies as well.
Yeah, and same. And like you, we see brands from all over. But the thing that I noticed in particular is that first point you made is that they look at the U.S. coming in. They very few of them, and we have brands from the same New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, Greece. They come in and with the understanding that there's a lot of independent markets within this country. They don't look at it as one massive market or one massive acquisition target. Coming from New Zealand, for example, looking at California is nearly 10 times the population of New Zealand. So most of those Kiwi brands would be pretty thrilled to dominate California, where a lot of our domestic brands, they start in California and 2 weeks later, they want to be, national. So I think it's just, I find that interesting. Here's a great question from Stephanie. This one will be fun for us, Bob. For a brand that is less than 1 year old, can you speak to the best way to go about developing a comprehensive channel strategy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would sort of build on what I said earlier about, piloting in a region. Now, when it comes to a channel strategy, I'll sort of repeat what I said earlier, that if you can be, say, on Amazon and some other eComm platforms. I think almost everybody should be doing that, especially shelf-stable items, so that as you get press, as you get some engagement with consumers, almost anyone can find you online. And so I think they're not mutually exclusive, meaning you can set yourself up on Amazon, get some help to do it properly. We have a friend, Betsy McGinn, who's not only a consultant, but a co-author. She wrote a book called The Amazon Roadmap, all of 18 bucks on Amazon. Good fundamental understanding for everyone. But you can be doing that while you pilot in a region. And when it comes to a channel strategy, for most of the people we tend to interact with, they tend to start out in the natural and specialty channel. These retailers tend to be less expensive, more forgiving, good match with the consumer. For most people, I would suggest starting in your backyard where you've got visibility in terms of what's happening, finger on the pulse, unfiltered feedback. In the days before COVID-19, I would encourage you to do in-store demos and tastings yourselves, so you get that, feedback from consumers. But a channel strategy is essentially making lists. It's a bottoms-up plan where if you're in, say, Metro New York, you're saying, I would like to get into, the following tastemaker accounts, whether it's Citarella, Gourmet Garage, Fairway, Zabar's, certainly Whole Foods if you can, West Side Market, University Market, Integral Yoga, the usual suspects, where, you start, building out that skeletal plan, which is a simple number of stores times number of SKUs times turns will be your, revenue line. And you can start to, map out timing and sequencing of customers. But again, usually starting with these premium, high volume independents, small chains, before you start to, increase the sort of level of investment and risk of being wrong by going into some of the larger chain accounts.
Yeah, and well, Yoda just nailed it, so I don't have no. Uh, the only thing that I would add to that, Stephanie, is this, and that is, in all likelihood, what you've created here in your one, your product, your brand is solving a problem or meeting an unfilled need. And so your first and foremost thing to do as you build your channel strategy is to think about how you drive trial, how you drive discovery of that. And one of the things to do there is to think about how you get as close as you possibly can to where that problem is most pronounced or that need most acute. And you start solving for that and building a route to that market. And so retail may be one, eComm may be another. But one of the things that I'm encouraging brands to think differently is about the way they define influencers. If you're a health and wellness product, an influencer could be a yoga teacher in a community who has a strong following, and having your product available at his or her studio is going to build a passionate tribe of followers who then will walk into their store and want to find it on shelf. So I would encourage you to think about where that problem is most pronounced and where that need most acute, and begin to map it that way, and then do exactly what Bob just said. Rebecca Cass was just saying hi to us, Bob, saying that she's glad to hear us talk so much about her homeland. She's a Kiwi. So Kula, and if anyone wants to see a really cool product, go to Kula's website and check out the first kombucha tab. It's very cool. Jenny had a question for us. Any thoughts and insights into managing PR on a limited budget with multiple new outlets picking up our story? How best to capitalize on that coverage?
Well, today almost everyone is doing, their consumer marketing is essentially storytelling in the form of PR, social media, some digital, etc. And so a lot of it is within your reach, meaning if you can't afford to go out and hire a PR firm, who's working on a retainer, etc., you can certainly be, putting together letters with info in your company, sending samples to local food editors, for example. you want to sort of get the echo chamber going, meaning that if you get something on Instagram, you're reposting it on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, etc. So you really want to do all those things within your reach. Certainly getting part-time help. So whether it's the proverbial millennial, college student, someone else who's just, putting out good quality content on a regular, steady basis, with your oversight, with your guidance as a founder. So it's, in your voice, and it's representing your brand and telling your story the way you want to do that. Again, that's within everyone's reach. And if you can afford to get some expertise, there's a lot of good PR firms out there who can really, amplify this in a very strategic way. So
Yeah,
by all means, you should be doing as much as you can all the time.
yeah, and don't forget just little hacks. Don't forget inter-industry, PR too, because influencing the buyers and the people in the industry. And then
Absolutely.
also don't forget, one of the great platforms for PR is your own LinkedIn profile. Your buyers are there, some of your consumers are there, your potential investors are there. So make sure that you're doing that in terms of Scrappy. But I think everything else you said is dead on.
And let me just, if you will, let me add, for those of you on this, you may be familiar already, but if you're getting the BevNet and Nosh daily newsletter and you scroll to the bottom, it'll have something like news at nosh.com, and they're really good about putting, publicizing your news, your press releases. So does Specialty Food News, the Specialty Food Association, who puts on the fancy food shows, and New Hope as well. So absolutely agree with Elliot that you absolutely want to, build up your awareness among buyers, brokers, distributors, and of course investors who are getting these same newsletters.
So that dovetails into this question from Gregory. In terms of companies raising capital, I've heard a lot of talk about valuations being moved lower because of today's current climate. The logic behind it is that investors are taking more risk in an unknown environment given COVID. My slight pause on this subject is that it's very self-serving in favor of investors and doesn't gel with the notion that generally CPG companies are seeing a push in sales and velocity overall.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Gregory. I do think that in this environment, if you think in the big picture at a high level, investors are boiling a lot of this down to two fundamental questions. Will the business scale, and how can they reduce risk? And then there's all the other fundamental, what are the margins? What are the velocity? How remarkable is the product? What's the team like? Has there been proof of concept in different classes of trade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But for now, the whole COVID-19, the likely recession we're going to be going into, that maybe a year or 2 years or longer. Sadly, the upwards of perhaps 30 million people unemployed and all the implications of that are just big unknowns. So I think, the era of frothy valuations, very high multiples of sales we're probably a bit past that right now. And so I think people out there raising money need to be a little more realistic about the current environment. Also, the whole velocity metric, which was a classic sort of proof of concept, is highly distorted going in both directions. So if you're a canned soup company, you're getting absolutely record sales you haven't seen in 10 years. It doesn't mean you're going to scale and be a 50 or $100 million company that's going to sell for an irrational multiple 3 to 5 years from now. And likewise, if you're in a category that hasn't seen the same kind of lift, I've heard things like energy bars and confection, et cetera, they might be growing just because of the sheer shift from away from home to at home, but they're not getting that 60, 70% lift. That might also be distorted in an unfair way, which is hard for investors to make sense out of it. So I don't think you need to sort of throw in the towel and sit out. It just means I think you might have to temper expectations around valuation and terms, uh, and be a little more flexible if you're looking to raise money today. I think like any process, part of it is the intrinsic value of what you're offering, all those key things I just mentioned, but it's also having a process where you've got multiple potential investors at the table, so you're not negotiating with one party. And so if you've got some options, you're going to make a better deal. And that's just, basic no matter, what you're doing in business.
Yeah.
And so I do think you can raise money now. I do think you're going to have to temper expectations around valuation and terms. And the more interest you have by talking to more people, the more likely you're going to cut a better deal as an entrepreneur.
And I'll add to that quickly a few things. First of all, you got to remember they're capitalists, and when there's an opportunity to use something that is improving their ability to get their returns, increased, they're going to do that. So understand that there's nothing wrong with that. Also, I would say, investors, especially savvy investors in this space, it is risk capital, but the difference is that savvy investors in this space feel that their participation can help to de-risk that investment. But what they can't do is de-risk the uncertainty that's around the marketplace. They have no influence over that. So that does have an increased impact in the level of uncertainty of any investment. I also, just some really tactical advice, and that would be is raise as little as you can. The more you can prove, the more that you can do, and really be, dogged in your pursuit of capital efficiency right now, the better. So raise the capital that you need, not the capital that you want.
Yeah.
And then also, I just wrote an article about this. I'm dark humor calling it an apocalypse round, but it's basically saying you've got to put some uncertainty premiums into what you anticipate, and you can start that dialogue with investors by introducing some, saying, "Hey, I recognize the uncertainty in the market, and I recognize that I have to differentiate my appeal to you from where I would have 6 months ago." And you can do things that have limited impact to your marginal dilution, but have big impact into the interest level of investors. And so talk to the people who are advising you there and get some good suggestions. A couple more questions while we have a few more minutes. This one from Jeff. What are your thoughts about product expansion and new product lines? Should a company stick very close to their original mission statement or change with new opportunities? For example, we make plant-based coffee creamers. We are exploring a RTD coffee and an RTD tea expansion line. With small brands, how important is it to stay in your swim lane?
Well, I would start off by saying things that you're doing today during the pandemic, if resources are scarce, are different than what you might be doing as we begin to come out of this, and or if you have more resources. One of our mutual friends is Andy Whitman. Andy is the founder of a small fund called 2X, Consumer Capital Growth Partners, and he's fond of using the term platformization. In other words, where a lot of the value creation comes in is, not selling items, but, creating a platform. So what does your brand stand for? Where do you have permission to take it? And in this example, if the brand is credible as a plant-based coffee creamer, and it also makes sense to extend into other ready-to-drink products, coffee, tea, other beverages, that's great. It just means, more growth, more expansion. It allows a potential investor or acquirer to see where this can go. Some extreme examples are Annie's Homegrown, where they didn't say we're a mac and cheese company. They said we're healthy foods for kids, and they might be in a dozen categories, from cheddar bunnies to fruit snacks to many others. And And I think if you can lay that vision out there, even if you're not doing it today, but if you're talking to investors or acquirers about your vision for innovation and expansion into other categories, both adjacent and maybe two steps removed, as long as they make sense and they're not a bridge too far. So I do think it's a good idea in the context of what resources you have, which include bandwidth, time, focus, attention, as well as financial resources.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of platform too, where it makes sense in the right adjacency. I mean, specific to RTD, just note that that's probably one of the most competitive,
Expensive.
expensive categories. Um, so I think just be mindful of that. But there are some great brands that have great opportunities right now to take small platform stances. Um, and but I would also say that you have to make sure that you're confident you know how to deliver consumers to your products first. So if you have your RTD coffee creamer, make sure you know how to get consumers to buy your RTD, your plant-based coffee creamer, and you can repeat that model in other categories, because if you're trying to solve for both at the same time, it gets pretty expensive. All right, we're gonna go. Bob, you cool for going a couple minutes over?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, got a couple more questions. This one is from an anonymous attendee, and it starts as "great job as usual." So it's one of our wives. So, do you have any additional tactics, perhaps out of the box, for gaining trial and awareness for local retail launch? We're launching Whole Foods 30 stores this summer, assuming no in-store demos and limited opportunities to sample overall. Perishable, single serve.
Oh, well, it's always good to have easy answers to easy questions.
Yeah.
So one thing I would say that I would consider is think about, even though you're not able to do in-store demos at this point like we've done in the past, um, one thing I would look into is, can you give product to the people in the stores, right? And so if you're going into 30 Whole Foods and assuming everybody's okay with this, it's being done in a sort of hygienic and sanitary way, like you're giving, packaged, sealed products to folks. I think there's been much greater awareness and appreciation and gratitude for the people who are, working long hours and under risky conditions for their health and a lot of stress, et cetera. And to express some gratitude, to offer them some product as a way of, just saying, hey, thanks for the great work you're doing. Oh, by the way, we're a new supplier. We'd love for you to enjoy some of this. That may pay dividends way in excess of whatever you gave away in product. If it means, getting a better shelf position, whether it's getting a secondary display, depending on, the product and where it's going. So that's something I would consider doing right away. You can also explore, whether you're able to do any kind of a shelf talker, any kind of, in-store violator, whatever you want to call it, to bring extra attention there. And even if you said it was perishable, a lot of stores might have a little perishable end cap, and see if there's a way of shoehorning your way into that. Again, maybe through charm and charisma, not just because you're running a promotion at the time, to get that extra visibility. And of course, whatever you can do in the way of, local targeted, PR is awfully important.
Yeah, and getting back to the in-store, I mean, the employees in the store can become not only great ambassadors, but great consumers. I mean, they're in the store every day, and so that's usually where they shop. So one of the things you might want to consider too, just in terms of making that a little bit more scalable, is sending each store, manager, store director, coupons. Have coupons made up, VIP coupons, to give to their employees as a thank you for being on the front lines right now, and an opportunity to get one of your products. And One, it's a nice gesture, and two, it's a great way to build ambassadors and consumers. So that's one. And then I think the other is to do what we talked about a little bit before, and which is kind of geo-target some potential brick and mortar influencer locations once they open up around there. And that could be yoga studios, things along those lines, and try to get them some product and then let it be known that it's there. But I would start, to me, the lowest hanging fruit is right with the people working in that store every day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, time for one last question from Vanessa. How do you advise and educate on the need for digital marketing for the foreign brands you work with, where this is less important in their home countries, possibly due to smaller competition / younger market, etc.?
Well, digital marketing is, very often used to drive people to your site if you're doing direct to consumer, or, driving them to Amazon, Thrive, and other eComm platforms, if the goal is to build sales. And I know this is fundamental, but with every investment you make, it always should have a purpose. It should also have an objective. And so if your success is based on sales metrics, be highly disciplined about what kind of results you're getting for the investments you're making. And whether it's email marketing, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram or something else, know what that return on ad spend is. Know how changing and altering your message is getting different results. So you don't just go in and throw a bunch of money at it. You don't just go in and abdicate to an agency. You need to be super highly disciplined about what kind of results are we looking for, and we're constantly, test, fail, learn, to keep honing and refining both the message and the sort of vehicle to reach consumers. So you're doing it in the most efficient and effective way possible.
Yeah, and I just add to that as a reminder to everybody that branding is an activity. It's the activity of aligning what people believe about your products with what you want them to believe about your products. And so that requires building a relationship and building a two-way form of communication. And that's what social media does. It's not one way. It's not you pushing your message out. It's you engaging your consumer in a conversation. So first of all, if you're going to do social media marketing and social media, make sure that you do it with that mindset that you're going to actually engage them in a two-way conversation and respond to their comments and talk to them and support them on their pages and do that type of thing. And I don't think it's market specific. It may not be as well known or well thought of in other countries, but building a way, having a mechanism to connect to your consumer and build a relationship as a brand is important, because people buy illogically. It's not Dr. Spock that's going shopping. Or Mr. Spock. It's people who carry with them emotionality and make decisions irrationally, and they make decisions based on things they like and they want associated with them, that bring them comfort, that they feel like they would about a friend. And so that should be your mindset, is develop a friendship with your consumers. So,
well said.
all right, we're over time, Bob. So any last words of Yoda-like wisdom for those listening?
Yes, I'm glad you asked me that. So as we go through this, I'm constantly mindful and reminded of the adage of, adversity doesn't build character, it reveals character. And I think all of us thinking about how we step up, how we behave, act, etc., during this time is going to be long remembered. And I think that really goes not only as us as individuals, but brands, companies, reputation, etc. And so, empathy is important, and positive, constructive actions, knowing there's a lot of people out there who have, are frankly suffering, both, from health and loss, but also economics, anxiety, etc. So, be mindful of that all the time.
I feel like we had a universal gut punch, and for those of us who are on um, the side of being just of good fortune, of being, very, very lucky, I feel, and for anyone listening, I feel it's incumbent upon us as individuals to not just waste that opportunity, to do some good with it in any way we can.
Hmm.
And so I would encourage that. I call them karmic boomerangs. I mean, just get them out there, and in all seriousness, and because I love to give you shit, Bob, but you walk that walk every day. You are one of the industry's great givers and
Oh,
of time,
stop.
of knowledge. So thank you
Thanks.
very, very much for being a part of this. And
Thanks for
we're,
having me.
we thought we'd be done early and we could catch up, but we can't. We got to jump to another call, but I will ping you shortly. And if
Sounds
not,
good.
I'll see hopefully all of you virtually starting tomorrow for the next 2 days at the Hirschberg Entrepreneurship Institute. And if you haven't registered, like I said, quickly copy it. It's in the chat box. Do it. And thanks so much, Bob.
All right. Well, thanks. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.